Hey, it's Alicia from mobilitymastery.com. And right off the bat today, I want to thank those of you that commented on the last video that I put out on fear of pain is fear of coronavirus, is fear of death, is fear of freedom. If you haven't seen that yet, we will link to it in the description box below this video. But I really, truly appreciate each and every one of you for sharing your own thoughts, for supporting me to voice mine here on this channel. And today's video is actually going to be kind of an extension of that one, broadening and then also deepening this topic of fear. And in particular today, what I want to talk to you about is the weaponization of fear that I have experienced very profoundly in my own life, and I'm seeing it just pervasive right now in our world. And I feel like this is probably the most important conversation any of us could be having right now, whether you're in pain or not in pain. Because the ability for an external force of some kind to weaponize your fear against you and create behaviors in you that may or may not actually be in alignment with your own truth and your own bodily sovereignty is, to me, one of the most important things we could talk about, right? So everything I do here at Mobility Mastery is designed to help you learn to trust your body, right? That's kind of been my tagline for a really long time is I hope you're learning to trust your body so you can adventure through life with confidence. And I want to actually state in this video something that I don't think I've ever really stated publicly in a video before, which is my mission here with Mobility Mastery and everything I'm doing on this YouTube channel and the blog and in my private practice and when I teach is my primary mission is to help you lose your fear of pain so that you can actually work with pain to evolve and become more adaptable, more courageous, more intuitive, more trusting of your body. When we lose our fear of pain, the sky's the limit. We become really unstoppable in a lot of ways, and our internal intrinsic fears can't be weaponized against us by any outside force. I, to be honest, don't really care that much about the specifics of anatomy and range of motion, and a lot of the physical therapy type things that you're going to see that other people are doing, and I love that they're doing that, right? They'll walk you through very, specific exercises for certain muscles and certain joints and whatever, and I think that's great that they're doing that, but that's not really been my thing here. What I care the most about is putting you in touch with your body in such a way that you get lit up by finally coming to understand how brilliantly designed you are, how adaptable you are, and come to know your own intuitive wisdom inside so that you can become your own bodily sovereign, so that you can make decisions about your own body and not fear it anymore. So it's, I guess, a bit more of the mental side of things, but ironically, we have to actually go into the body, I think, and learn about the body to lose our fear of pain. So it's a very holistic picture that I take. And I just wanted to share that as some context for today's video. And I want to maybe just warn you that I am going to share a personal story of mine that I've never shared before in this video. And it's slightly graphic. So if that's not your thing, or I don't know, I don't, want to shock you. So I want you to know I'm going to share something related to some trauma that I went through that's relative to this story of my own fear getting weaponized against me. And it kind of actually is what set me on this entire journey of even being here talking to you today. So right now, right, we're in this situation still of fear being weaponized. How? Well, we're being told we should be very afraid of a virus. We should be so afraid of it, in fact, that we have to stay home and, cover our faces and only go out when necessary. And the economy is getting absolutely ruined and all the things that you already know, right? Because we're being told we should be very, very afraid. So the question that I always want to raise when someone outside of me is telling me I should be afraid is I check in and I go, do I believe I should be afraid? Because if I don't believe that I should be afraid, I'm not going to be afraid. And how do you know if you should be afraid or not afraid? You have to actually invest some time educating yourself about whatever it is, maybe, that's going around, whether it's a story or an actual virus, right? We need to educate ourselves. So this idea of fear being weaponized and something that just galvanized in me when this whole thing started actually had to do with, in the very beginning, like 3 months ago, or whenever this started, it feels like a long time ago now, hearing a couple interviews with Dr. Judy Mikovits, who you may have been listening to as well. And in her kind of story, she talks about studying HIV and AIDS back in the 80s. And my mind just went, and this is kind of what sent me totally down the rabbit hole with this whole thing. Because as I mentioned in the other video that I did last week, I really didn't know much about viruses. I didn't even know that it's genetic material, that they're not alive, and thus you can't really kill them. But I did have a very personal story around viruses. So I want to share that story with you today and why I feel, given the context of the current paradigm, I feel a responsibility to share my story and, kind of help us have a different conversation than the one we're having today, because it strikes me as quite similar to what was happening in the 80s and early 90s around HIV and AIDS. So as some of you know, I've been through a pretty serious trauma, or series of traumas, starting when I was 13. And I'm not going to tell the whole story here. So if this feels like, wow, Alicia's teasing us or not giving the full story, you can read the story on mobilitymastery.com in the section about me, Meet Alicia. I've told that story in other places in the Fashionista videos. So I'm not going to go into the whole thing today. But the short story is that when I was 13 years old, I had just turned 13. I was targeted by our 30-year-old next door neighbor, who is a male, and he spent about 6 to 8 months grooming me and psychologically priming me and my family before ever doing anything to me. And then, slowly, one small action at a time, made me his sex toy, I guess you could say, or, I don't know what to call it. It was not a relationship. Obviously, I'm 13 at this time and he's 30. But I don't remember the first time I had sex. Still to this day, I don't. I just kind of woke up, I must have dissociated. And then I kind of woke up and I do remember everything prior to that and everything after, but there's kind of a blank space in my memory around sex. I was 13, terrified, and my mind had been used against me. So already my own psyche is getting weaponized against me at age 13 and by this 30-year-old man. And this whole drama lasted about 2.5 years. And there's a lot of other things that have to do with that story that aren't really relevant for the part of the story that I wanted to share with you today that I've never shared before, which is that after he'd already had sex with me, so it was kind of too late for me to maybe, use my voice or use my no or go tell someone. This was, I think at a time when he'd already figured out he won my psyche, at least up to that point. And I wasn't going to go, get help or tell anyone what was going on. And so after this, he tells me that he's HIV positive. And he kind of tells me somewhat apologetically, but also like, he just wanted me to know I should know. And, he was definitely psychopathic. So there's that, if you know the psychopathic mindset. And it instilled in me in that moment just like this freeze and terror, because I don't know how old you are or where in the world you were in the late 80s or early 90s, but I was learning in school, in sex ed, just how horrific your life was going to be if you acquired HIV. And the narrative being told then was basically, if you contracted HIV, you would get AIDS and you would die a horrible, horrible, horrible death. And we were forced, in 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, to sit in these classrooms and watch videos of people dying of AIDS. And we were told, basically, what I believe was happening back then is they were trying to use our fear of that experience against us at that age to get us to not have sex, basically. And so he tells me this, and immediately, I'm filled with fear. Like, I'm gonna die of AIDS for sure. I'm only 13. And at the same time, he actually told me that he acquired HIV by using a heroin needle. He was a drug addict and an alcoholic, and very abusive in a lot of ways. And he acquired HIV through using a heroin needle. And he told me that when he learned he was HIV positive, because he also believed the fear narrative getting, perpetrated upon the world at that time about HIV, always turning into AIDS, basically, like it's a death sentence. He believed no adult woman would ever want to sleep with him again. And he decided to sell his soul to the devil. And he made a bargain with the devil. This is for real. That if the devil kept him alive, he would do whatever the devil told him. So this was kind of his excuse, I guess, or story for doing what he did to me. So because he believed no adult woman would sleep with him, he targeted a very lonely, easy to target 13-year-old. I had a lot going on psychologically then. That's another story for another time. But, because he believed the narrative, he did what he did to me. And perhaps if there was a different narrative, that wouldn't have happened. And, I don't actually regret any of my life now. I am grateful for every single bit of it, including that experience. However, I still have very human feelings about it. And when I heard Judy Mikovits talking about the HIV/AIDS kind of scandal back in the 80s, and she was basically talking about Dr. Fauci, I'm not going to go super into this story because it's not my area and I'll probably mess it up. But the gist of it was that Dr. Fauci and Dr. Gallo, I believe, had patents on and kind of got them not so above the table for the drugs related to HIV and AIDS. And they withheld Dr. Judy Mikovits's data and research and other people's research on the fact that we didn't really need to fear HIV, that it doesn't always lead to AIDS, and that actually there's natural, pretty risk-free therapies that can help people. So this research was withheld. It's still really pretty much suppressed and withheld to this day. And hearing all of this in light of my story made me really angry at first. And then, like I said, my mind was blown and a lifelong mystery for me was solved. So I want to come back to the weaponization of fear I also want to acknowledge how shocking this story might seem. It's not to me anymore because I've lived with it for a really long time, but it may come across as really shocking to you. So this situation with the 30-year-old lasted about 2.5 years until I summoned the courage to tell him, no, you're not going to do, whatever this is, it's stopping. And so it was from about 13 to 15 and a half. And from 15 and a half for pretty much forever. I mean, I think even up to meeting Stefan, my fiance, but gradually started to diminish. But from that entire period, so almost, over 15 years of my life, maybe 20, I lived in, well, I should say for 10 years, I lived in utter terror that I was going to die. And I, of course, I wanted to be normal. I wanted to be like a normal teenager. I wanted to date. I wanted to do normal person things, but I didn't feel normal inside. And so this was another battle happening inside of me from 13 to, for a long time, pretending I was fine when I was anything but, because I just wanted to be normal. But this fear that was used against me in a couple different ways just was so pervasive in me. I was convinced that I had to have acquired HIV and that I was going to get AIDS and die. And pretty much religiously for 10 years, I tested myself every 6 months. Because back then, the narrative was, if you had sex with somebody who was HIV positive, you would, supposedly it would take about 6 months to produce antibodies. And then after that, if you didn't, you didn't have them in your body, or it wasn't testable or whatever, then you probably weren't HIV positive. But the primary test back then was an antibody test. And so every 6 months, I mean, I was so terrified that it wasn't just 6 months later. I just kept doing it for every 6 months for 10 years. And every single boy, man that I met, I would, immediately, if I was dating them, feel like I had to confess how dirty and potentially, infectious I might be. And so it had a profound effect on my psychology, on my dating life, on my entire mind-body space, really, this fear. It probably, like, this one fear probably ruled my psyche and ruled my life for a really long time, above and beyond all the other fears I had, which were many. So, starting from 13 and moving into my 20s, I developed, as some of you know, knee pain, and then anxiety and digestive issues. And I felt trapped in a body I didn't understand or know how to help. But this one fear of HIV/AIDS lived in me because of the story perpetuated in the media, in my school, by this man who did what he did, that if you were HIV positive, you were dirty, you could infect other people, you could kill them, no one would want to have sex with you. And, that fear ruled my life for a really long time. And, even until meeting Stefan, I think I shared with him right away. It's just became part of what I did. Is I felt like I had to share this part of my life, and the fact that for 2.5 years I had sex or was essentially raped, not violently in a traditional one-off sense, but for 2.5 years by somebody who was HIV positive. So to me, it's been a lifelong mystery. Like, how did I escape? How did I escape that? Like, how is that possible? Now I know how it's possible. I just listened to a Zach Bush interview, another one, in which he said, we're starting to realize just how prevalent virus viruses are, even particular ones like HIV, hepatitis, and herpes, in the human body without symptoms. So there are, studies being done that show, they put 8,000 people through who had absolutely no symptoms or no history of disease or illness, and did a bunch of tests on them for specific viruses. And it turns out pretty much all of these 8,000 people had a number of viruses, including HIV and herpes and hepatitis. But the HIV test only tests for the antibodies. And anyway, the point of this video isn't really to go into that, but it's utterly altering the way that I'm looking at this. And this probably shouldn't feel surprising to me, but nevertheless it did. I've been learning about the human psyche and the human body since 2004, and then in 2008. So 2004 began for me learning about the psyche, and then in 2008 learning about the body. And the more I learn about what's here biologically, in the nature of the human body and the nature of the human being and the nature of the world, the more my mind is blown, and I realize there's not a lot to truly be afraid of. And yet fear is so pervasive, right? So last week I talked about fear of coronavirus as fear of pain, as fear of death, as fear of freedom. And I'm not demonizing fear. There are a lot of people who might actually say, fuck fear, and, don't let fear, run your life. And, I don't know, they demonize it. I don't want to demonize fear. I actually think fear points to what we value the most, right? I was 13 years old and just starting my life. And this fear of I'm dirty, fear of death, fear of illness and disease, and being, unwanted sexually, indicated what I valued. I valued being vital, having health, being wanted, not being dirty, but being like a clean, healthy, vital human being. I valued life. I wanted to live. So I don't know that fear itself is bad, but when it's weaponized against us, this becomes very problematic, because we tend to outsource our trust then, because we've become so terrified by this external story and being told we should be afraid that we then think whoever's telling us to be afraid must have the answers too. And so we make ourselves dependent on some external force instead of an internal force, for comfort, for the cure, for treatment, right? And most of the time, what those people and systems and institutions are going to advocate, after telling you to be afraid of your own body and to be afraid of bacteria and germs and viruses, of course, is their lab-created, very expensive injections, vaccines, drugs, cures, right? So the point for me of this video, and the point of, I believe, my life's mission, is the more we actually take back that dependence and take responsibility for our life and become dependent on ourselves and on our own body, and the more we learn to trust our body, and the more we actually educate ourselves, we'll realize how brilliantly designed we actually are, and that there's not a whole lot to fear here, maybe nothing. I have come to a place where I really am challenging myself to always live in a paradigm that whatever is painful, be it knee pain or an emotional experience or a relational experience or fear of a virus, right, or disease or illness, that's an experience triggering me to get curious. That it's, I might have fear still, right? But I don't know that I have to be afraid. I can go investigate the fear. I can go investigate whatever's happening in me. So what I want to point your attention to here, and the reason this feels so relevant to me here at Mobility Mastery, is we have succumbed to a large degree in the Western world anyway, to our fear of pain, physical pain, all pain, being weaponized against us by systems and institutions that want us to be dependent on them because they make a lot of money off of our fear. and our dependence. So, for example, in the world of physical pain, you know, in the Western model, I don't see anybody who lives in that model and offers the available treatments within that system, empowering and educating people about how amazing the human body is, how brilliantly designed, how capable of self-healing, how creative and adaptable we are. I don't see that. What I see instead is the weaponization of fear. You should be afraid of your body. That pain signal you're feeling, very, very scary. You know, we gotta get a cortisone injection in there right away, or brace it, you know, immobilize it. Perhaps you need surgery. Perhaps there's something really, really wrong with you, right? We're gonna put you on painkillers that are addictive and have a lot of side effects. So this entire system to me is corrupt, and that's another story that I'm not really going to go into today. But and I want to be clear that I'm not demonizing doctors or nurses or anyone in that field unless they're doing something knowingly, like if they're like consciously complicit in the deception and the profiteering, then I would say, yes, I want to hold them accountable. But I think a lot of people enter the medical system with really good intentions, and then maybe they don't know that they're actually entering a system that's primarily pay to play, where unfortunately a lot of the science that's coming out of colleges and institutions and, you know, funded research is oftentimes pay to play, where it's giant corporations and big pharma paying researchers and scientists to study diseases and then create, you know, lab created cures and drugs that they can make a lot of money on selling people. So they tell you what to be afraid of, and then they say, but here, I have the cure. And I believe that one of the most incredible revolutions we could engage with right now, especially with what's going on in the world currently, is to take back that dependence and depend on ourselves, to realize that our own fear of our body, of viruses, of germs, of anything, of death is being weaponized against us, and to not only look within for our own wisdom and our own intuitive knowing of, you know, what is really worth being afraid of. You know, do we really have to be afraid of pain? And I know at first this concept is very foreign to people. You know, we've been taught we should be afraid of pain. We've been taught pain is scary. And we have to unlearn that. We have to unlearn it. So it is a process. I'm not going to tell you it's just like the flip of a switch and suddenly you're not going to be afraid of pain anymore. It's a process. But when we can take back our bodily sovereignty and decide to be responsible for our own health and our own mental health. So when I say health, I mean the health of body, soul, spirit, our psyche, our physical self, then our own fear can't be weaponized and used against us. So that's kind of the gist of the message. I know, you know, I don't want to leave you with nothing to do with this information, but for me, the solution to the weaponization of fear is, like I just said, to take back the control reins and decide for yourself if fear is warranted in a given scenario. So how do you do that? It really depends, I guess, on what you're being confronted by, what the fear is. So, you know, in my own story and in my own life, even though initially I think the biggest fear I had was of HIV and dying of AIDS and being, you know, damaged and infectious and shameful, the more obvious, that wasn't obvious to me. I mean, it was, but what got my attention more was this pervasive fear of my own body. I was afraid of my body. I didn't understand it. I didn't know how to help it. I felt like my body was actually torturing my mind. And if my body would just cooperate, then my mind would be at ease. And so I set out on a journey to learn absolutely everything I could about the human psyche and then the human body. And I'm not done learning. I am learning all the time. I mean, I have gotten such an education in the last 3 months on viruses. My mind, again, blown. And every time I decide to put the fear over here for a sec, I'm not dismissing it, and I'm not telling it it shouldn't exist, right? But I put it over to the side for a sec and say, what if I could learn something here? What if this doesn't have to be scary? What if, this narrative being circulated isn't the truth? What if there's an empowering narrative I could discover? And every time I do that and I learn something, I am astonished at the beauty of life, the beauty of nature, and the nature of how a body functions, the nature of this world that we live in. And I shared some of that last time in relationship to viruses being genetic information and communication messengers for adaptability. I mean, that to me is like such a mind-blowing, revelatory spin on this story that not only isn't something fearful, but it's inspiring, and it's just awe-inspiring. I'm in awe. I'm in awe of nature. And I think what I want to leave you with is whatever maybe is currently up for you in terms of fear of pain or fear of illness or fear of, maybe it's the psyche part of it. The primary solution has to start, I think, with education and being willing to take those reins and invest time and attention and focus for yourself in learning about whatever it is you're currently afraid of. So whether it's physical pain or psychological pain, you can go learn so much about how pain happens, right? Or if it's coronavirus right now, I don't blame anyone for being afraid. I was, made to be very, very, very afraid of a virus earlier in my life. And if I could go back and whisper in my ear, whisper to the 15, 16-year-old me, I might tell her, like, it's okay to be afraid, and you don't have to be afraid. You could go learn right now the truth about this experience called HIV and the virus and AIDS, and you could go learn about the corruption in the medical system, and what you're being told is not necessarily the truth. And maybe I wouldn't have had to live in so much fear for so long. So freedom awaits those of you willing to invest in your own self-education about how brilliantly designed your body is, and also your mind and your being, and how all of those actually work together to create health, or to get your attention that something is maybe a little off and needs attention. So pain to me is always a messenger that something is a little off and our attention is needed. So at the beginning of this video, I shared that my mission was to help you lose your fear of pain. And this is why I call myself a pain advocate. So whether it's an illness or a disease or physical pain or psychological pain, to me, all of those things are communications, messengers from some part of either us, maybe our subconscious, but maybe life itself, maybe nature, trying to get our attention that something is off. And if we were to actually invest in learning and getting curious, then we can take care of it and move on with our life. So I want to foster a movement of being co-creators with the animating force of life, with nature, rather than warring against nature. Because I don't believe two things. I don't believe we can heal a body we're afraid of. So if you're living in a state of fear of your body for any reason, I'm not sure that healing is really available to you. You can micromanage your body and you can snuff out the pain signals for a while and you can, kind of kick the can down the road. That's certainly possible, but I don't know that healing is available in an environment in which you're afraid of your own body. And then number two, I don't believe we can declare war on nature, which includes pain being a part of it. Cycles of death and regeneration are part of life. And we, when we declare war on nature, we declare war on our own body. So that's what I'm going to leave you with for today. I would love to hear your thoughts again below this video. And of course, I have tons of resources on this channel if you do want to dive further into exploring your body through fascia release, and a lot of the mindset side of things I cover too, as well as the science. So there's a lot of resources here, but there are other resources available to you as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.